Hi there, I'm Trevor Koot, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. Today we are joined by Rex Farrand. Rex is co-founder and CEO of My HealthSpan, whose mission it is to extend both health span and lifespan by decades, not just years. From teaching 8th grade science in Brooklyn to building a health tech startup in Vancouver, Rex's journey through entrepreneurship is fascinating. In this episode, we talk about how he built a classroom like a company, how his time at Google and Meta shaped his perspective on innovation, and what it really feels like to be a CEO staring down the edge of a startup runway. This is a great conversation about leadership, risk, and doing hard things, even when you're not sure if they'll work out. I hope you enjoy this episode. Rex Farrand, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Trevor.
This is, I'm really looking forward. I've had some founders on, a lot of people that have started small businesses, but I always kind of think about founding in kind of the tech space and kind of in that environment a little bit different. I'm really looking forward to this story. I have to give a shout out to Zia Punja that introduced us.
Yeah.
I'm sure his name will come up later in the podcast. And he and I got introduced when we did TEDx in 2023. We both did a TEDx at Royal Roads University. So anybody looking for a little bit more inspiration on kind of taking care of your own health and thinking about longevity in life, you can check out Zia's TEDx on YouTube. Rex, as I do with everyone, the first question: what was your introduction to business? What was your introduction to entrepreneurship?
Well, because I know that's your first question, I thought about it, and instead of giving you the mowing lawns story that probably some people have given, I thought I'd give you like a unique story that's unique to me, and I think is really defining to me. Right after college, I went. I'm American, married to a Canadian. My kids are dual citizens. I went to school in Los Angeles and thought I was going to be like Zia, Dr. Punja, our chief medical officer, my co-founder, and be a doctor.
Yeah.
Did everything for that. But what I actually ended up doing was joining a program that made me an 8th grade science teacher in East New York, Brooklyn. And that public school system experience, teaching where 98% of my kids were very low income, so they were getting free and reduced lunch provided. 95% were African American or Hispanic, and I am put into a eighth graders out of all the grades you could possibly. I didn't get to choose. They said, "Here's the need."
Of course.
And given my science background, you're teaching science to 8th graders. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you introduce yourself? How do you manage a classroom? How do you basically start your own company within an organization, which is the school, because your classroom is your classroom. That's my business and so forth, kind of
right.
Thinking that way.
Yep.
And there's many stories I could tell on this, but the thing that I landed on, which is very entrepreneurial in my mind, was when I was about that age, money started to motivate me. Being positively rewarded started to motivate me. And so I thought, okay, what's one way I could uniquely connect with my class? I had 200 plus 8th graders. They were split up into basically 4 different classes. And I created a whole ecosystem around giving classroom paychecks, assigning each class a actual company. So it was like Biochem was one company, Chem Inc. They're all like science themed businesses. I would greet.
I love where this is going.
I would greet them at the door, and I was wearing I wore a tie every day. They'd have to like come into the door. I'd give them handshakes when they came in. If they made a peep, they're kind of like, "Who's this guy trying to be strict?" And I didn't smile until Christmas. But the entrepreneurial side was creating this business concept, creating a paycheck system. So it was like, hey, by default, there's an arbitrary amount, like $25 of scholar dollars, and you got rewarded for completing your homework on time. So you could get a raise. I would track the highest performing students from behavior and academics and give them the CEO title. So then the CEO became the person who shook the hands of their classmates as they came in. I created a CFO title. They were the ones who actually like signed these checks and handed them out to their classmates. And then I created a COO title that would help me. It's a science class, so you'd have to participate in labs, and I would need to do demonstrations. And so like that person would be like the demo person. And so developing this kind of entrepreneurial structure that nobody else at the school did was a way that I think created a different environment for my kids that had previously lost three teachers. They'd been through three different teachers in the 2 years prior. And so when they came into my classroom, I think it was like a good spark of innovation and a new approach to classroom management, to be honest.
I really, really like that. I've got two things I just want to dig into a little bit. The first is the motivation, you being motivated by money. Was it more like, did you see that in yourself, that that was kind of the trigger? You knew that you weren't going to be in this job forever and there was going to be a path beyond, or you just saw like money is part of the world and these kids need to understand it a little bit more?
It was a little bit of both. I'd say it's
Yeah.
more of the latter. I
Yeah.
remember distinctly, actually, for me growing up in Seattle, Washington, fourth grade was the first grade I actually got introduced to, like, and nobody writes a check these days, but
Right.
this
Of
is like
course.
in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And they would actually say, like, here's how you write a check. You
Yeah.
have to write the words out for the number, you got to sign and all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And for me, I was like, oh, recalling how how grown up that made me feel, even though I was in the fourth grade. Or retaining like scholar dollars. Also, they incorporated that again in the fourth grade, and I was teaching eighth graders. Just gave me a sense of like, oh, of control, that I
Yeah.
could kind of control my destiny outside of class, and in our ways, it kind of related to class. So, as far as behavior and showing up on time, showing up to class, doing all the things that you would bare bones expect, and especially for my students, which had more historical difficulty, having that built in as like a best practice, it was really turnkey for them. So I thought, I'm not going to give out candy. I'm not going to give out gold stars. It's a
Yeah.
form of gold stars, I guess.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think
And
something that
promotion,
could,
like the promotion into roles and the responsibility that comes with it. I mean, there's a
yeah,
lot there. Yeah.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, just like many entrepreneurs, each element kind of took off. Like I didn't have the full baked. I was like, okay, there'll be themed companies. We'll do paychecks. And I was like, you know what? How do I involve my students and get them to actually want responsibility? Then I was like, okay, let's do this. Like, oh, I can just tap into these chief executive type titles,
Yeah.
and assign. I'll cap it at 3. Like I didn't get too crazy, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you have to be flexible too.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. So my other question was going to be kind of what inspired you, but it was from your previous learning. You
Yeah.
you had kind of seen the model and kind of adopted it. Um, and then I had the thought, wouldn't it be amazing if 18 or 24 months from now, I'm doing this podcast with somebody and I say, what was your introduction to business? And they say, I had this 8th grade teacher.
Yeah, Mr.
Right?
Farrand. Yeah.
Can you imagine? That would be amazing. Full circle.
Honestly, that does spark something, which is to say, there's certain I think a lot of people have these sparks, these moments of like inspiration, or
Yeah,
the one or two teachers you still kind of remember.
totally.
And I do recall, if I'm gonna brag on my students' success after, I do recall, one student, similar to what you're saying. One student, she got accepted into NYU, which
Yeah,
is no slouch of a school,
right.
especially from where my
Yeah,
school was,
yeah,
in Brooklyn. And we just kept like a very positive kind of mentor relationship. She started going to finance and was asking me questions and things like this. Like she's well beyond my understanding now.
Right.
And then another student, actually, at a time that even when I was in the professional world and was laid off and was looking for jobs and searching, and I saw on LinkedIn, I was like, Shaquille is at Salesforce and he's at this senior manager role,
Wow.
like
Yeah.
type of like would never have imagined
Yeah. Of
that
course. Yeah.
that type of situation would happen. And he's talking to me about, oh hey, like I can connect you with this person at Salesforce and whatever. And I'm like, wow, like
Yeah. Yeah.
never
Yeah.
would have imagined it. Never would
Yeah.
have imagined it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've written before about more from leadership, not necessarily from business, but from a leadership perspective, that lessons in leadership are they're fleeting. They're moments, right? And if we're not paying attention, both as kind of the one providing the inspiration, but also the one receiving it, that you miss these small things, these things that you'll remember and kind of lean on. And several of the examples that I write about are from teachers, because that there's a huge impact there in our development. So okay, so let's move on in the story. You give me a sense of kind of post teaching, what your kind of timeline is, age, and where that transitions into kind of the business world.
Yeah, it transitioned, it pivoted almost immediately. I mean, if you were to look at my LinkedIn profile, you would see quite the journey. You would see somebody who does this, teaches eighth grade science. I got my master's degree, but like immediately the first week that I joined, I was brainwashed, or started in school. I was brainwashed previously that once I start getting a paycheck, of which this was my first paycheck, I should think about retirement. And
Right.
that means like, what's a 401k or an
Yeah,
IR, like what are these like tax
love it.
deferral investment
Yeah.
accounts I can look into, like what's investing. I know the stock market, but I don't really know. So that first semester, I turned on CNBC for the first time in my life. Uh, Found out who Jim Cramer was,
Yeah.
like a big, enthusiastic personality.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, like I should probably read more than just Jim Cramer. So let me like open a Wall Street Journal. Like that's an adult, again, like I just graduated college and I'm not, reading the Wall Street Journal. But now I'm in New York City, the financial capital of the world. I should really, why not?
Yeah.
And so that immediately built up this sense of, okay, what am I going to do after? I didn't enter teaching in order to be a lifelong teacher. I knew through this program that I was going to do at least 2 years. I was like open minded to going at least four-ish, maybe longer. I didn't know how it would impact me. But once I started to like feed into the system of, this is the stock, market, here's how it works and everything, that I got really intrigued, and I ended up applying and got a job at Goldman Sachs. And so right after teaching, I went to Goldman Sachs, and that was, I want to say, the week after Bear Stearns collapsed. I don't know if
Oh
people
wow.
remember the financial crisis. I'm sure they
Yeah.
do. So I remember starting my job, and the person to my right and left within like the first 2 weeks were fired. I was kept because I was so cheap.
I
But
was gonna say,
they
yeah,
were
okay, that
clearing
makes
out,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were clearing out all of the overhead
Yeah.
component of it, and we're like, well, this cheap analyst,
Right.
we can keep him. So I was at Goldman Sachs for like 3.5, 3 years. From there, I had a college connection who basically recruited me to go to Google, of which I was like, I've used Google. I don't know what they actually do for business, but joined Google and went to their ads side of the house, which is like where they generate all their revenue. I worked there. I then pivoted into a couple different startups in the ad tech space in New York City. And then most recently met my wife, who's from Vancouver. We have two lovely kids, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. and we moved to Seattle, and I got a job at Meta or Facebook. They were Facebook. I joined Facebook and I left when it was Meta.
Yeah.
And I think, from that gap to then this last jump, which is, founder and CEO of My HealthSpan, you mentioned Zia. Zia is actually, I guess he would be my cousin-in-law. My wife's cousin is married to Zia.
Okay. Gotcha.
And Zia was visiting Seattle, upstairs here. I'm in my basement office, visiting for the first time, and we're sitting around the kitchen table, and he's like, "Hey Rex, like, what do you like? You work at Meta and you do like advertising. I think like we need some help with that." And I was like, "Oh, tell me more." He tells me about my health span and this really unique concept, and I said, "Wow, that sounds like you're not putting enough in. Like, it seems like this is kind of a side hustle idea you have, but I think you have a real something here. But Zia's a full-time oncologist,
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like you don't have time to actually lead this." And it was intriguing enough to be like, you know what? I'm looking for my next thing. This seems like worth taking a risk on. Talked to my uh, co-CEO, my wife, and said, "Hey, here's the situation. I'm really bullish on it," and that's kind of it. Now it's been about a year and a half. Yeah, about a year and a half since.
Okay. I
That was a
the,
lot, right?
there was a lot. I want to go back because I'm always fascinated. There's of course this comes out of the original question, what was your introduction to business? And I'm always fascinated about that journey because there's so many different elements where somebody could have obviously taken a different course, like a different path,
Yep.
right? And those kinds of things. But also there were elements, you were exposed to elements that could have gotten you to the point where you're visiting with Zia in the kitchen and you said, absolutely not. I see what these other people in startup positions are going through.
Yep.
That's not like, I'm happy to. So I want to just, what was that experience? Let's go back to probably your Google days where you're kind of getting exposed to kind of that advertising piece. You're getting more exposed to how that business operation within Google works. And then you go to a couple of startups.
Yep.
Like, it had to be a whole different experience to see kind of the pace of growth, the strategies, the scalability, the pressure, the intensity.
Yeah.
Like talk to me a little bit about that.
I think yeah, so many things we talk about. The first thing that resonates is the product and the tech side. My health span, we are very focused on marrying health and tech. And if the tech component wasn't a part of it, like I'm not interested in like starting a practice or a clinic type of thing.
Right.
But
Right.
that first exposure to technology at Google was really eye-opening. I mean, obviously, I don't know what your audience, like what percentage of them have worked at a tech company, but that was my first experience. And as part of that, you kind of enter in thinking like, okay, I know Google search, they acquired YouTube. I've used YouTube, but like, what's behind those user interfaces? What's behind the
Right.
screens? And I think what was really exciting was, at the time I was selling for big packaged goods companies like Coca-Cola or Unilever.
Yeah.
And um, the amazing thing was, hey, they have a lot of money to spend, and so Google wants to listen and say like, hey, what can we build you for that amount of money? And so that was
Right.
eye-opening to see from a Goldman Sachs structure, like this is the process, this is how we do things. You don't go outside of that. To Google being like, hey, there's an opportunity, let's innovate. Let's talk to
Huh.
engineers and product people and
Yeah.
get into a room, and they want to understand the problem. They want to like, okay, cool. Heineken, the beer company, they want to throw something related to a sponsorship they have in Paris. Uh, what can we do with Google Maps and location tracking and advertising and all these kinds of fun? I was like, we can do that. It was very eye opening.
Right.
And so I think that is very contagious to people who innately are kind of creators. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, right? Like going back to that classroom, I was creating that environment, right? If I was told, here's how you're going to run your classroom, it wouldn't have been as exciting for me. But I knew I had some creative flexibility to make that environment that. And so to see that reflected to technology and then to see what technology can do, that was really exciting. I think it's continued over to today. I don't think you can talk about technology unless you talk about generative AI. And
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just got this really cool demo yesterday from our head of engineering where the premise of my health span, I won't go too deep because maybe you want to dive into that later, but people come to us and they have an ability to get blood drawn and other test data. And one of the problems we've thought about with that is, how do you make sense of it? If I gave you company A and company B and it said company B tests more things, most people would be like, yeah, I want to test for more things. I want to be more comprehensive. But then the understanding of that's incredibly difficult. Now with generative AI, we can leverage that to help make that so easy. So we're using it at My HealthSpan to take somebody's results, algorithmically calculate a score that helps you just understand, like, how healthy am I and what's my health potential out of 100. I can digest that and then I can dive into the weeds of why that number exists. I can ask questions to an AI coach, longevity coach on our platform that then asks, hey, out of all the results, what are the top 3 things I need to do? It'll spit out that response. Okay, digest it and give me it in a trackable weekly planner for the next month. It'll do that. Okay, great. Write this out. And this is where Zia gets really excited. Take that recommendation and those results, spin it into a letter to my doctor, and let me download this and take it to my GP or forward it to my physician. And that's where the connection of, we're definitely out of pocket, something to that Canadians might be, some are very open-minded to, but that's where you can be proactive yet still have this connection to then influencing the public system. And so all
Right.
of that is powered by generative AI and all of that. And so coming back to that whole point, the creativity within tech that I was exposed to at Google, reinforced to at those different startups, and then continued on at Meta, only made that opportunity to like think about, okay, how can we apply technology to this problem that Zia is trying to solve, sitting at our kitchen table, even
Yeah.
more exciting.
Yeah. I want to get into more of the business side, like, and you mentioned your 1 and 3-year-old and kind of that whole just life as a founding CEO of a startup, but and I feel like we're kind of we're kind of jumping all over the place, so we're more in today's world now. But I do want to reflect on kind of some of the um uh, what was the investment firm you were with, or the bank?
Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs. When you were at Goldman Sachs, there would have been like you rightly kind of differentiated the innovative environment between Goldman Sachs and Google, and that exposure that you
Yep.
had. But how much of that would have been regulatorily kind of stringent, right? Like from a regulatory environment, there's just it prevents innovation, or stifles it. And how much of that is kind of following you into the My Health Span world? Like how, because healthcare is like, there's a lot of
Yeah.
oversight, and some of that would limit. You can't just have a Heineken show up and say, have some fun with us. And so where are those limitations for you?
I think the early learning that at Goldman, regulations and institutional structure was incredibly important,
Right.
has been a great foundational understanding that has kind of followed me through, right?
Yeah.
Even at Google and in the ad side, like on the surface you don't think about it, and then nowadays everybody's asking about like consent, even just for marketing purposes, right? Let alone like what you're going to do with health data. And so I think having that exposure was really great because it was foundationally planted a seed that this is always going to be important. I think for me, trying to find the balance is often pushbacks that we have, right? Like as a founder and entrepreneur, you're trying to think about where's the balance between revenue and following this most strictest interpretation of this governing principle,
Right.
or where's the balance between innovation and like trusted evidence backed results.
Yeah.
And as a CEO, I think you are chief decision maker is one of your other titles, and trying to make those decisions quickly but informed based on this experience is something that like I don't think I'd be able to make the decisions as quickly if I hadn't had that experience.
Yeah. 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 And balance it, like you said, with kind of what the expectations are. I think the other piece that we lose sight of, there's a sense that, the consumer is going to continue to drive some of the input into those decisions. The consumer is going to tell us, like this is where the line is for sharing my information or leveraging my information to do whatever, to improve the platform, even whatever that
Mhm.
is. But I don't know that that's always true, because the like I accept the terms of this, the little box pops up and the end user agreement, and you click you throw the check mark in the box and
Yeah,
say I accept. We can't lean on the consumer all the time to kind of drive what those expectations are from a privacy and a security perspective.
completely,
Yeah.
completely. I think you're right, and I think that's where the I won't say like the more morality of the founding or the executive team comes into
Yeah,
play, but
but
it definitely has a huge influence,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
We haven't raised through like a VC, so we don't have like a massive board governing us, and which the morality of them might also have an influence.
sure.
Like my wife, she's a CFO of a immigration startup here in Seattle, and they are very influenced by the board. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they've raised a lot of money, and so we have a little more freedom to kind of decide amongst our exec team what do we want to do, and how do we apply that.
Yeah, yeah,
But to your point about like consumer influence, we I'm happy that there is no shortage of consumers asking us questions,
yeah,
of customers responding and being like, "Hey, where's my data?" That was one of the first things, and why it was really critical for us, um, and for me to push us to hire a privacy policy and trust lead, somebody whose sole job is to ensure that we are following the letter of the law to what's needed. And we're also taking that extra step to be transparent about what we're doing with data, what we're not doing with data, the consents, the opt ins, the opt outs, and being on the leading edge. Because, again, both health and tech are in these areas, like you said, these industries that are all continuing to drive for regulation and governance. And so having somebody focused on that, it's been critical for us.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then even just being able to have some sort of line of sight into when that might change, right? Like because like all it takes is a leadership change in any government, provincial, state, federal, whatever it is. And that starts to have influence on what that exposure is, what the requirements are, all of that kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, so going from Google to the few start, or no, you have
Yeah,
to,
that's right.
yeah, to a few startups, yeah. um I do want to kind of get into more of your experience in being the CEO of a startup,
Sure.
being like the various pressures, the various things that you're keeping an eye on, like raising capital and monitoring runway has to kind of continually be on your radar, and it can't be all of your thinking. But I'd assume that the general question of what keeps you up at night, like that has to be right up there. And maybe not. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll
can we
delete that.
book a second hour for this, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah, part two.
yeah,
um, but I before we go into your experience,
yeah.
I want to get an understanding of what your exposure was to the experiences of those startups that you were, and how, like, obviously it didn't detract you completely, but how much of that, like, seeing that happen kind of uh, was part of your decision to move ahead on this with Zia.
Yeah, I think my exposure to startup world was easy. I would argue that it was easier for me to do from coming from a place of Google than some if I had come straight from Goldman Sachs.
Okay. Yeah,
Google was a great
makes sense.
bridge to this tech space that showed me, that introduced the concept of like equity ownership, and like what is that? Because
Yep,
that is like the crux of all startups is,
totally.
hey, we are not going to be able to pay a lot of cash, but there is this lottery ticket, I don't know, this equity that
Potential.
can be worth something
Yeah,
extremely valuable if the plan is executed on.
yeah,
And so I think having had that experience and understanding, then joining the first startup I joined was this was back when like phones were like still brand new, sort of, as far as like using them for anything and
everything.
everything.
Yeah,
And that I was employee, I think number 9, I forget. And so joining there is like, oh, this was where I was hired. This was my title. But the needs of everybody here is actually like you're wearing 3 different hats, even though that was my one title. And everybody else was also chipping in. And I think something that was exciting about that was the flexibility of, I was hired for this more sales focused role, but I'm sitting next to the lead product manager, and I'm sitting across from the engineers, and we're in one space in one room. Whereas at Google,
yeah, right.
completely different buildings, completely
Yeah,
different cities, completely
yeah,
different everything. And so that was exciting. It was exciting to be like, wow, I can actually hear the engineers and product team talk about the problems they're trying to solve. I can add my own 2 cents about here's where the business can apply to it, and that gave me this freedom of flexibility, and that's actually where I pivoted from where the sales side to the product side, better understanding the technology and all that kind of thing. And I think um, taking that to the other startups that I joined, um, and having that dynamicism was very important for me, and exciting, because then here we are, talking to Zia. I don't know if I'm jumping too quickly, but I was like, great, who do you have working for you?
yeah,
And it's like, we don't have many people. Okay, great. We are going to need to. And when you're trying to recruit and hire for people, like that was one of my first questions is, how flexible are you that I might need you to do 10 things that aren't on this job description?
yeah,
Um, and that's an easy filter for a startup founder or somebody running a startup is, if you say no, this is the only thing. If there's inflexibility, like you're not the right fit. But
yeah,
if there's somebody that's, hey, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, that's who you want, because
yeah,
that's often
yeah.
the mentality you need.
And that makes sense that that would have been a direct line of, like, from your experience at the startup to kind of what you're looking for, because you were in those shoes. You were doing, beyond what your job description would have required.
Totally, and it's not like
Yeah,
I was a CEO. Like there was definitely imposter syndrome saying I'm a CEO. There's definitely imposter syndrome of saying like I'm a co-founder,
right.
partially because of the weight and responsibility that carries,
Yeah,
but also like I've never done that before.
yeah.
Aren't you supposed to have been how do you, like,
At some point you're the CEO for the first time.
yeah, what's the career ladder to get to actually that title?
Yeah,
Um, but that's the exciting thing about the tech space, and ultimately, I think that's what it is. I'd shown, if there's a historic arc or theme, it's like literally rolling up my sleeves and getting the thing done, whether it's from the classroom to solving the problems at Google and Heineken and creating new things, to the startups and seeing the flexibility and like pivoting into roles. And then here as a CEO, like I didn't run, a P&L and understand financial model and burn rate and talk
Right.
about the different investment options and safes, and like that is getting a mini MBA almost every day on a certain topic,
Yeah.
and trying to execute it and correct yourself as you're doing
Yeah. You weren't discussing burn rate with your grade 8 students when when you were
it.
handing out checks. What's your runway?
Yeah, exactly.
What's your runway going to be with this one? One of the themes, I try not to always mention the themes that come up in the podcast, because then I feel like it just becomes part of the thing. Like now I can add our conversation to that theme kind of thing. I'm planting seeds, but certainly it comes. And you said it already, like the amount of education that happens on the fly. Like there's no way to learn the role of a CEO, the decision making aspect of a startup, all of the things that come with it, from like, and the thing is, you do have to have an understanding of all of the things, not just a really good financial understanding. You need to understand like everything. And that happens, you said it's a micro MBA every single day. And I think that this idea that lessons happen in real time, the learning happens in real time, really creates, like, that message can start to create an understanding from consumers, from people who are on the outside and don't have that experience, to understand, like, people are coming into this without the predisposed exposure and understanding and education, and they don't know until they go through it. And that's to your
Yeah,
point earlier, like, who makes, like, how do you become the first CEO? Like
yeah,
somebody has to.
yeah,
You have to be the first. It has to be your first time at some point, right? So
completely,
yeah.
completely.
Yeah. Okay, so um I do want to get a sense, because like I said before, like a lot of probably the majority, or certainly a good portion of guests that I talk to are kind of small business owners. It's kind of a more of a self-financed environment
Mhm.
where, cash flow refeeds the business, and they're not looking at scalability the way that you are. Like, how do we
Sure.
get more exposure to more people, like, and compounding it with compounding returns? um Tell me a little bit about that, kind of that piece of it. When you came in, what was the first kind of capital call that you had to do, if any? What kind of what does that kind of trajectory look like for the company?
I think, the scalability is probably one of the top five, three words that any startup, a tech startup,
Sure.
would want to be as a focus. And I think the reason is because, like, that's if we're all having the equity, then yeah, that's the only way that becomes valuable.
Right.
We will not be valuable if we run this company like a mom and pop shop and we are only focused in Victoria.
Yep.
We need to think about Vancouver. We need to think about Toronto. We need to think about all of Canada. And then we need to be also thinking about, okay, what comes after Canada?
Yep.
The US, great. What comes after the US, the UK? Like, you have to be thinking about scalability, because the solutions or the problems that a lot of tech companies try to solve, and ours is one of those, apply to this huge audience. And it's not just we're opening up a burger stand in whatever city to satisfy the burger demand. It is There is a real problem with access to health testing and then ownership of your data after the fact. And that exists here in the States, and it definitely exists in Canada. And
Yep.
so, trying to apply that problem solving for the scalability piece is really important. And I think um, how you then raise the funds to enable the scalability, that's you know we're in that challenge today. Like, we did a self-funded founders approach to get something off the ground. Then we reached to friends and family, trying to figure out, okay, great, do we go to venture capital capitalists and family offices and others who have like a ton of money
Yeah.
and ask them for a ton of money only to be having like oversight over what we want to try to execute? Or do we try to do, the next step up, and see if there's product market fit? And then, like you said, like we're constantly in a time crunch of when will this pot of money slowly disappear? And how quickly can the revenues keep that pot from completely disappearing? And then when do we need even more money to make this even more scalable? And so trying to keep an eye on all of that is incredibly difficult, let alone, like you said, one of the things you said this precursor was like, you need to know how everything works. When we have a salesperson, like I have a sales background, in B2B elements. How do I help coach them
Yeah.
into doing that? Because um, we have who we have. And so if they are really strong in other areas, great, don't need to coach them there, but I need them to be a little better in these other areas. How do we do that? I have an understanding of operations and processes, but it's not like, hey, I can just say, hey, who has experience and wants to like take a risk on a health tech startup like ours? And so we have people who have, again, shown that real dynamicism, approach or characteristic of, I'm here, I will do what it takes, I will learn, push me in the right direction, and that's who we have.
And how transparent, like I going back to your comment earlier about kind of you incentivize through equity, maybe the pay isn't right there, but if people can sign on to the vision, if they can invest of themselves in the company and say, work beyond the job description, all the things you've already covered, how transparent are you with kind of the financial, like you said, like we have so much runway, how much of that kind of information is the team exposed to so that they can kind of be invested in kind of the holistic environment as well?
That's a great question. In my own, I'll differentiate. When I was at Google and Meta, clearly like the financials are out there, and the scale is so huge that you're kind of, if you're an employee there, you're not necessarily thinking about, oh, are we
Sure.
going to make
Yeah.
payroll?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say more at the startups. I guess I've taken my approach and really influenced by them. I had probably minimal exposure to the raw details. Rather, I knew what our revenue quotas were. I knew what our revenue in any given year was. And there were certain elements of that. But even at that scale, like those were startups of like 50 to 100 plus.
Yeah.
We're 10.
Yeah.
Out of those 10, I think 6 have like an equity stake,
Right.
and others are contractors. And so how I think that's been a unique, consideration that I've had, is like, how much transparency do I share? I'm definitely on the more transparent side, but when it comes to like runway, like I'm having those conversations about how much runway we have left rather than the actual decimal places of here's how much money we have left. I think
Sure.
you
Sure.
can
Sure.
still
Sure.
convey
Yeah.
the main goal and idea and concept rather without getting too bogged down in the weeds.
Yeah. Well, because they're investing the same as if somebody was putting in a bunch of cash and they wanted a return on it, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
Um, what's you've been at this for a year and a half. What's been kind of, if I say what was your hardest day, does one jump out? Does something does that resonate with you, or it's been 18
Oh yeah.
months of hard days?
I would say honestly, you could be talking to me on my toughest day right now.
Oh yeah.
We are, and I think that's because, when you do raise money, there's kind of a reprieve. We have cushion, we have
Yep.
a long
Yep.
runway
Yep.
based on all our financials. And, you know, if I were to ask anybody listening to this to like create a business plan for any business, it's great on that first day. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And day two, it changes.
Yeah.
In day two, all of your assumptions and your financial model are different. A month later, a year later, and everything has changed. And throughout that process, you are hypothesizing, trying different things, doing this, doing that. And so throughout that, I would say, like honestly, like we're at a place where it's like um, it's like the best of both worlds. We have so much promise in some real huge business opportunities and partnerships that if they click go this afternoon, my worries are like gone.
It's a whole different
It's a
conversation
whole different
tomorrow.
conversation.
Yeah.
If they continue to delay
Right.
for another 6 months, like they've already done, then I'm really feeling the squeeze. And I
Yeah.
think for me right now, it's a means of, what are the sacrifices that need to happen? And I think as I know vulnerability is one of the focuses that you try to emphasize. I think one new thought that has entered my head in this past week has been um, the I can control myself and I can take the punches myself. If we're in a cash crunch, I can stop my very small salary. That's fine. I can talk to my wife about injecting more funds because I truly believe in what we're trying to do. As it impacts all of my employees and thinking about that sacrifice I'd be asking them to take, again, being very intimate and being like this
Yep.
10 people type thing, that is additional pressure that like literally woke me up in the middle of the night last night. I was like, how do I have no problem taking no salary. I'm expecting that they will.
Yeah.
I have no problem having hard conversations with myself. Will they want to stick around? Because we're still scrappy. Like these are all thoughts that are entering my head. Do we have enough right now to where we can like push for an additional fundraise? Um, because we're like I said, if these deals spark in this afternoon, wow, somebody might be really excited to jump on board. But if
Yeah.
they don't, that pitch to a potential investor is going to be that much more difficult. So honestly, I would say like you're talking to me at one of those moments.
And now, two things. I think anybody, we're going to be well beyond this day when somebody listens to this, but I can guarantee you that that will resonate with a lot of people. All of that context, I can guarantee you that. And second, I wish I could give you a hug right now, because it's I mean, each day brings its challenges, and for you to be able to identify that this might be that day, like that's heavy. And I think I the connection to the team, the connection to the people that are in the trenches with you, I think is often overlooked.
Yeah,
There's this sense that business owners, startup founders, CEOs can just easily dismiss people from an organization to save the bottom line, and we lose that perception, that understanding of the real emotional connection that is built between the people in the CEO seat and the folks that are working with them to advance the company. And you've really
completely,
articulated that well. Yeah.
completely.
Yeah. um Rex, I promised you a stop, and we kind of, I feel like we're leaving this on a little bit of a cliffhanger,
Yeah,
um, and that might be a good thing, because what I want to do, if you're open to it, is leave the door open for a follow up
completely.
conversation, and get a few more months or some time
I'd love that.
under your belt and the belt of the company, and then see what transpired. And dude, I just want to say, like, thanks for the vulnerability, thanks for creating the space for people to be able to hear your story. And I really, you got this. Like, yeah,
Thanks, Trevor.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks for the time. Hopefully, I didn't end this on like on a down note. It's more, I think it's a realization that startups, especially tech startups, my wife said something. I was like, startups have like 9 lives. You are People have heard pivoting. People have heard all these different terms. I don't. I My experience right now is no different than what all of the successful startups that people think about have gone through multiple times in
totally,
their history.
totally.
And so that is the that is like the silver lining. Like that is like the light out of the tunnel. And the fact that I'm like an eternal optimist. It's like, and I believe in what we're doing. And so I know there's a there. How do we make sure that we give us enough time to actually make that a reality? And so sometimes you have some difficult problems or conversation to have, but at the end of the day, we think there's a huge opportunity. So I would love to come back,
Yeah.
share what happens, and see where our journey is continued.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, and it wasn't a down note. It was a reality, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's the point of this is just to tell the truth, be honest, and and that'll resonate with a lot of people. It did with me. So yeah,
great.
thank you so much for the time, Rex.
Of
Really
course. Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Business is Fucking Hard. Please remember that this show is meant to create community and share ideas in the business world. For advice specific to your business, talk to an expert in your industry. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram and LinkedIn and invite others to do the same. This episode was hosted by me, Trevor Koot, and produced and edited by Alex Harris. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you next time.